Hey, it's Joey Thurman. I'm excited to bring you Season 2 of the Fad or Future podcast. We live in a world where information is everywhere, easy to access, and sometimes not always accurate, especially in the health and wellness space, which is exactly why I created this show. There's two sides to every story, and I'm here to present both and let you decide, is it a fad or is it the future? Health fads come and go, but the science behind them is what makes them work. Or fail. I'm bringing the experts to you and putting the facts on the table so you can decide how and where to put your efforts in your own personal health and wellness journey. All right, what's going on? It's Joey Thurman, and another episode of the Fad or Future podcast, and I'm here with my buddy Rubio Fuerte, all the way from Vienna. He just came back from a run, so apparently he is walking the talk or running the talk, I guess, if you will. Rubio, you're a nutritional scientist. Well, first of all, thanks for coming on. And secondly, what's a nutritional scientist versus nutritionist versus dietitian? What is it that you do?
Well, first of all, Joey, thanks a lot for having me. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Well, what I do, I'm a nutritional scientist from Vienna, Austria at the University of Vienna. And what a nutritional scientist does is focusing on nutritional components with the effects on the metabolism. And we spend a lot of time with analyzing food components in hygiene and their effects on the metabolism precisely, where a nutritionist mainly works with clients, in particular with just developing the nutrition plans and doing interventions in that section, at least from my knowledge. So they don't really have the particular work in the labs and doing the research on their own. They're just the ones that work with the clients. And that's the explanation.
Okay, so you're the one that has done all the research that the nutritionists are using to speak to their clients.
That would be the field, yeah.
Yeah. All right, so
we're the ones with the lab coats on and standing in the.
And you're actually in shape too, because I've seen lots of people in the nutrition field that, you know, like they might be thin, but as far as actually working out and lifting weights, you actually do that. What's your athletic background?
Well, I come from a tennis background, so to say. I also played at the college with a scholarship in the US. So that's my original background. And then just when it turned out that I'm not good enough to compete at a professional level, I switched to natural bodybuilding just because I love the sport and always admired the athletes with the jacked look, and that's always been my idols like David Hay and Günther Schlierkamp, like the German bodybuilder, famous one. So I went that path and enjoyed that a lot.
Well, that's something you don't hear, a tennis player turned bodybuilder, because that's completely two different frames. I mean, you got kind of a much leaner frame on a tennis player, and then bodybuilder is obviously carrying a lot more muscle tissue. So
that's true, yeah, but that's where where the difficulty came for me. I just turned too heavy at some point and had the entirely wrong focus with my training. I was always the athletic guy and always a little bit too heavy to move fast enough around the court. And my coaches just couldn't get me away from that, because I was basically addicted to, doing heavy bench pressing, heavy deadlifts and all that kind of stuff. So it's,
So your body might be more conducive to putting on muscle tissue, and as opposed to, being a more of a endurance type athlete. I mean, tennis players, you've got a sprint component to it as well. So you got fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers. But if you're putting on muscle quite easily, you might have chose your wrong sport all the way through college, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, they tried to recruit me for American football as well. But I just wanted to go ahead and do my sport, which I loved, from childhood on. My grandfather was my first coach when I was, 3 years old or something. So, I always have been with a huge passion to this sport, but maybe a couple of years too late with accepting that maybe it's not my future profession.
Sure. Yeah. I played hockey all the way through college. These teeth, they're actually real. But yeah, I dabbled in one game of minor league hockey, and when there was a bench clearing brawl, I'm like, all right, this is not for me. I don't think I can go play in the NHL and make a ton of money doing this. All right. So let's get into it. So you have a really interesting. We found each other on social media, and you've got a really interesting account. You've got a lot of infographics, and you really get into obviously the science of things because that's what you do. Now, I want to really talk about a lot of the fads and the myths. I mean, especially since this is Fad or Future of nutrition, because there's so much shit out there, and everybody can find a specific study to fit what they want to believe in, right? I mean, you're going to have that confirmation bias, whether you're a vegan or carnivore or paleo or standard American diet. Everybody's going to find some sort of study that says why they are right and why it's okay what they're doing. So right now, let's just get into it. Why do you find people just don't believe science, and how do you find the right scientific study where you can actually believe what the science says?
Well, my attempt has always been to not really go with just one source, but recombining information that I find. Whenever information goes to people's heads, when we talk about humans, there's always going to be a bias in every study. These people do it with a specific interest, and usually they have a financial background. So somebody has to pay for it, and there's always some kind of bias. We have to just accept that. And that's not a bad thing, because otherwise we wouldn't have any science at all. And what I do is, just before I work with a specific topic, I try to evaluate what potential conflict of interest there could be, and then find information from all of those sections where the information might come from, and then just evaluate for myself what I think is the real deal, or the information that makes the most sense for me, because there's no real other way of doing it from my perspective. So there's always going to be bias, and in the end, it's a little bit of personal perspective as well. Of course, I have specific ideologies, and I try to put my information out as rational as I can. But of course, with the knowledge that with my background, I have it's always a little bit of a bias. But yeah, we do our best.
I mean, I guess that's all you can do. I mean, as opposed to seeing some random comment on Facebook or something, if you actually look into the background and where the study is from, I think that's probably a good place for people to start with. And are there multiple studies to back up what you're finding, as opposed to just one study why soda is good for you, whatever the hell that is. So what do you think is the main thing right now that people are really struggling with as far as nutrition, right? I mean, is it the main myth that you think that carbs are bad? Maybe, well, let's just get into this. Carbohydrates. What do you think about carbohydrates? Because that's one of the main things people, when they start want to lose weight, they just want to cut carbs. What is your rationale behind carbohydrates, and are there good ones, are there bad ones, or should people just cut them completely?
Yeah, there's definitely a difference in the quality of carbohydrates. That's the first aspect that we have to talk about. So it's a difference whether you consume a refined carbohydrate in shape of some kind of gummy bears with super high processing, or if you consume an apple or a sweet potato. That's of course a difference. But the first thing that we have to look on, or that we have to focus on, is that we have 3 macronutrients, maybe 4 if you want to include alcohol, which doesn't really make sense, but
right.
It's fat, protein, and carbohydrates, and only 2 of them are essential, meaning that you have to consume them from the outside exogenously to keep up all body functions, and those are protein and fat. So carbohydrates are non-essential, meaning that you can synthesize all the carbohydrates that you need endogenously through a process called gluconeogenesis. So that's the first thing that we have to accept. That's just, there's not really a question about it, which doesn't mean that we have to, demonize carbohydrates. They still are in or in the background, or if you want to perform on a very high level, also on a cognitive level, that's something that we have to take in consideration. But the main aspect is that we can't base our diets on carbohydrates when we know that there are 3 macronutrients that are essential and 2 that are essential, and carbohydrates is none of them. So it's all a little bit, the perspective that the mainstream gives you on that wouldn't really tell that, So that's something we really should focus on in this debate.
Yeah, because I think that people, when they hear that the, non-essential versus essential, they're thinking, oh, like, well, I can completely cut them out. But you hit the nail on the head, and it's probably contextually based, right? If you're an athlete, if you're looking for endurance and power and strength and cognitive support, yeah, the right amount of carbohydrates are probably going to completely matter for you. I mean, are people fat adapted or keto, if you will, which we can get into that too. But, aesthetically, they're probably going to be much leaner because they're not taking in those carbs. So why do you think people feel like they need to be completely cutting these? Because keto is huge right now, right? And people going, and I know that you made a post about keto, and what did you call it? Auto ketosis, I believe, or auto ketogenic. Why do you feel that people need to cut that so much? Because there is a certain percent of the population that having a high percentage of fat probably won't be good for them because they can actually digest them.
Yeah, I think the general purpose of achieving ketosis is a little bit weird. Also, when the community, when this keto community debates the kind of things, because there is no ketosis is a metabolic state which has not really any, benefit apart from maybe some kind of autoimmune disease or some cognitive diseases that we can talk about, where it's really might be a great targeted intervention. But for an average man or woman, the state of metabolic ketosis has no average over just the regular metabolization of all the natural foods and the entire spectrum of foods that we have. So when they talk about ketosis, what they usually mean is that they want to lose body fat, and that's the buildup of ketosis emphasizes the metabolization of fat components in your body. But just because of ketosis, you're in a state of ketosis, that doesn't mean that you're actually losing body fat. That's just a metabolic state. So that's why I talked about this term autoketosis in my Instagram page, which basically means that the purpose behind that should be that you're metabolizing your own body fat, and not by just eating all the food and all the fat components from the outside by desperately trying to get into the state of ketosis, which doesn't make sense from my perspective, to be honest.
Sure. So, I think that's what people don't understand is they think that need to be in this ketogenic state to actually burn fat, but you can burn fat if you're having higher amounts of carbohydrates. You can burn fat. It depends on what your system is using. So how can people really know, if they're actually utilizing proper nutrients, if they're actually burning fat, right? Because people always think about, I need to completely cut my carbs 100% so my body can start pulling fat as an energy. Is there because you work with professional athletes, right? So if you want them to lose fat, what do you feel like is the best course of action, for someone to do that?
For me, the best course to do that is actually going with natural body signals. And, my attempt would always be to primarily rebuild natural body signals and hunger signaling before I work with the client. And then, in a state where you have natural hunger signals, you can really trust the individual's body signals and then go by them and build up a dietary regimen built on their individual needs, which will always lead to the ideal body weight in every case. So there are individual differences, like the composition of the microbiota, which you have to take into consideration every time. You can measure those things with a lot of work that you have to put in, but the easier way to do that is just rebuilding natural hunger signals and then go from there, which always leads to success. Sometimes I have to work, I have to be honest here, I have to work with forced feeding or a forced diet when, for example, I work with a lot of combat sports athletes that have to have a specific weight on a specific date. So what we do is just, play around with the hydration and with the food sources, etc., to just drop the weight drastically. But for an average person that tries to lose body fat, you shouldn't just focus on metabolic state or something that comes from the outside. That should be an endogenous process. You should trust in your body signals and build up your own dietary regimen based on them. And there is no expert that knows what's the best dietary intervention for you. All we can do as experts is to help you to find out what's best for you individually by activating your natural body signals. That's at least my perspective. Yeah.
So when you say your own body signals, how do people know what that is, and how do you tap into that? Right. I mean, I think a lot of people are confused when they're actually hungry or thirsty or tired, or you've got all these natural body processes. I mean, how do you start with someone that really doesn't know how to tap into that?
The attempt usually is by cutting out the processes that trigger you away from the natural body signals. So that is what we focus on. And that would be, for example, exclude all the processed foods that you're consuming, because they are designed to disrupt you exactly from those signals, which in the long term always lead to overconsumption of those foods. So for example, when we talk about processed sugar, you won't gain weight because you eat a Snicker bar at one particular time. But if you don't break that behavior, it is going to accumulate. And for the next event where you have a Snicker bar, you need more of it to experience the same pleasure. And then you have this process. And by breaking that circle, for example, with the focus on the sugar and that, we rebuild natural hunger signals, and people start to crave for real foods. And then you build up on those individual signals. And that turned out to be a very precise intervention to lose body fat, and has a success rate of 100%, at least for my clients. I can tell that.
Really? So how long does it take for someone? I mean, you say processed foods, so I'm assuming just the candies and the sweets and the sodas and all that sort of stuff. How long does it take for someone to cut that out until they really start understanding their own hunger signals? I mean, is it a couple weeks? Is it months? Is it immediate? What do you notice?
That depends a bit on how long people have been in that cycle, and it doesn't only depend on the on the foods that you're eating, but also majorly on your environment, because the adverse behavior usually is triggered by things in your environment as well. Because people get back at home and they sit on the sofa and then start eating a lot of crap, while watching on the TV. But if you don't break the behavior of sitting in front of the TV in the evening in the first place, you're always going to trigger back that behavior. So it's also a big psychological component behind that. So yeah, it really, how long it takes really depends on the individual and how the ability is to break those behaviors. It could be 2 weeks, it could be 2 months, but later, more than 2 months, I actually never experience if the client really is willing to make the changes and, accept that this is going to be a process that will have a I don't know the English word for it, but it's going to induce some short-term pain. And if you are able to sustain that and work through that in order to achieve something better in the long run, that's a major aspect, if you can do it or not.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm sure the people that come to you to work with you, one, if they're athletes, they have a high drive anyways, so they're going to pretty much do what you tell them to. And I think anybody that is really ready to, I mean, if you've played, professional sports or high level sports, and you've push yourself through that pain and discomfort of training, and you want to do everything that you can for the most part, and that includes nutrition. So I'm sure, yes, it makes sense. It's completely individually based. All right, let's talk about some big ones here. Salt. Everybody demonizes salt, and especially, I mean, you even have like DASH dietary approaches to stop hypertension. They say you got to cut salt because of high blood pressure. Everybody says like you need to stop salting your food, or particularly having high sodium, right? So what do you think about that? And is salt that big of a problem as we've been told by the medical professionals?
I mean, when you ask it like that way, I would say yes, with the first intention. First of all, when we talk about salts, usually it refers to sodium. As a chemist, salt can be a lot of things. So when we talk about regular salt, and you usually talk about the sodium components with the chloride that you can find at the supermarket, and that definitely is not the biggest, not the big problem that causes hypertension, because sodium overconsumption usually has the background of first carbohydrate addiction, because nobody just overeats sodium in a healthy state. That just doesn't happen. It doesn't feel right. Nobody does that. Mm-hmm. So there's already a physiological, respectively a psychological disease in the background that induces that misbehavior. Sodium is not the problem for hypertension or any kind of those diseases that most people try to link it to it, or however you say it.
Right. So it's the combination of the processed carbohydrates and everything that come with the additional sodium intake that seems to be the problem.
Yeah, exactly. I did a post on that, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, where I explained how processed carbohydrate consumption forces the body to increase sodium retention. So it's, when we talk about those complex metabolic pathways, I think we're probably going to lose some of the people. But, if you're interested in reading through that, I did that on my Instagram page. But definitely the sodium is not the problem, because I have no client at all, or no athlete that overconsumes sodium in a healthy state, or that just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah. I mean, and you're going to need sodium, especially if you're an athlete, pre and post workout, to replenish those electrolytes, and you're losing that in sweat. So, I mean, I think it's a recommendation like 500 milligrams of sodium pre and post workout, depending on, what you're doing too. And I mean, I think in the States, 2,000 milligrams of sodium, or 1,500 to 2,000 milligrams of sodium is the recommended. And I know myself, I'm taking 500 milligrams of sodium pre and post workout. And on top of that, adding sodium to my foods. So I'm probably having 3-4 times the recommended amount. My blood pressure is completely fine. So yeah. It's really interesting to see that.
Yeah. So I can add something to it. It's it's a natural exercise of the renals and the kidneys to excrete excessive sodium from the body. So without an already severe state, it's pretty much impossible to have too high sodium levels in an acute state. That just doesn't really happen. You would have to indulge, lots of sodium to achieve that, and that it just doesn't happen with natural body signals.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're active and you're not having a bunch of processed carbohydrates, probably don't really have to worry about your sodium intake that much.
No.
Okay. So along the lines of sodium, cholesterol, right? So we'll talk about red meat and eggs and things that have these high cholesterol things. So, I mean, we're getting into the main myths right now. What do you think about, people consuming? It used to say that you should only have 1 or 2 servings of red meat per week. And now, obviously, with keto and carnivore and all these other diets, you've got these people that are eating red meat multiple times a day, and they're having high amounts of saturated fat and cholesterol by way of what they're eating.
Yeah, also the same thing with cholesterol, almost like with the sodium. The cholesterol that you're consuming from foods is not the problem, because the liver that we all have is very precise at regulating the cholesterol that is moving around in our bodies. And the liver synthesizes around 2 grams of cholesterol a day, and the amount of cholesterol that we have in total in our bodies is I think around 35 grams of cholesterol. So it doesn't really sound like a toxic component to me. Cholesterol is essential for so many processes that happens in our bodies that demonizing it for whatever reason just doesn't make sense. That already is, a huge point of miscommunication. You can't demonize a food component, a food component that is essential part of the androgens that we have, which is essential part of the vitamin D synthesis, which is essential part of the cell walls. How is that going to cause harm, especially when we know, okay, the liver on itself endogenously produces 2 grams of cholesterol. We don't consume that much ever from the outside in one day, and the liver is going to adjust to the amount that we consume, so it's not going to increase the levels that way. We know that alimentary, meaning from food, consumption of cholesterol doesn't increase the levels of cholesterol in our bloodstream. So that cholesterol might be a good parameter for certain diseases, but that would be an endogenous problem caused by other effects.
Okay, so I mean, people still think that having like eggs is going to cause their cholesterol to spike like crazy. So for most individuals, unless they have some sort of issue, eggs, red meat, you'd say that's okay as long as they're not combining it with some sort of processed carbohydrate.
I say those food components, eggs and meat, have been essential part for, I don't know, 4 million years. And and I don't see the point why now, with increasing weird strategies to force people to eat more vegetables and focus their diet on carbohydrates with very questionable propaganda attempts, I must call it that way. I don't know why those foods that that are perfectly natural for humans to consume now all of a sudden turn into toxic components. Every natural food that we know has a place in human nutrition, and that includes all natural plant foods and all natural animal sourced foods.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. So, that's pretty funny. Yes, 4 million years. That's a very, very good point, Rubio. All right. Now, what about you made a post about the brain teeth axis, and that was actually really interesting. Can you touch briefly on what that is?
Brain teeth axis.
Yeah.
I just showed a picture of the connection, from the nervous system, from the teeth, in direction of the brain. So I just wanted to point out that, infectional diseases in your oral tract, if you want to call it that way, don't just, that have the effect that you have acute pain or local pain in your teeth, or is it just an infection in here? It has a lot of, direct impacts also potentially on the brain and its physiology. So my main attempt of this post was just to show how close that connection is. And you shouldn't, when we talk about food components like sugar or processed fats and etc., we always just focus on how that affects the metabolism after actually consuming it, and then it's going to have an effect when we have metabolites running around our bodies. But actually, already the intake in your mouth has direct impact on your nervous system, on the reaction with certain hormones. And, I just wanted to point that out, how that works. And I'm pretty sure I got a little bit more on the research area in my post, but just to give an overview, it's a very close connection, and not only the components that you have in your stomach are going to affect your metabolism, also what happens in your mouth already has a huge impact.
Yeah, interesting. Well, talking about digestive system and the gut, I mean, how important is our gut health for our immune system, and how do we make sure that, we do have a proper gut health?
Well, the gut health depends on the dietary regimen that you're on mainly. And people tend to overcomplicate this topic usually by topics like probiotics, prebiotics, whatever. I don't know what the term was. I had something new all coming up with that as well. I don't know what that is all about. But when we talk about gut health, we usually talk about the barrier there, that the mucosa is intact, that the metabolization is effectively, that we can absorb the nutrients that we want to absorb, and excrete the toxins that we don't want to have in our metabolism. That depends on the health of the microbiota, the microbiome that we have in our intestines. And keeping that intact depends on natural foods, basically, which might differ individually, whether it's more of a plant-based or more of an animal-based attempt. But it's all about the natural foods. Yeah, that's basically what I can tell you about it. And the microbiota has a direct impact on basically every aspect of our metabolism, and just because it affects the absorption of every nutrient. So the range of potential negative effects of a disrupted microbiome, for example, by abusing antibiotics, is huge. So that's why the side effects may be very imprecise at some points as well, which makes it a very, very complex topic.
Yeah. So do you recommend people, take some sort of, probiotic or digestive enzyme, or you just want them to go to eating more of a natural food sources and plant sources, and see how their body responds?
Well, the balance of the microbiota depends primarily on the environment that they have to live in, and those depend on the food sources that you eat. So that's the prime balance of which bacterium you want to have there, or what's natural for your individual metabolism. That depends on the food choices. And the only time when I recommend probiotics would be after the abuse of antibiotics. So you consume a lot of probiotics if you just consume, for example, natural milk products, but that happens just as a side effect. But consciously adding probiotics, I only recommend that after the excessive use of antibiotics, which unfortunately is a huge problem in our modern society. And that really disrupts the microbiome long-term potentially, and causes a lot of problems. So in that case, it might be needed to force the microbiome to regrow faster by having probiotics. But the main aspect is always the environment of the microbiome.
Okay. So what are the most harmful foods that you want people to cut out? I mean, the specific type of processed carbohydrates, seed oils, sugar, combination of them all, really, what are the worst things that people are intaking that are obviously not only affecting their weight, but their immune system and their overall health? What do you feel like people need to cut out first and foremost?
Well, it's always a holistic attempt that I'm going for when I try to do those kind of interventions. And as I already said, it's every natural food source has a part in human nutrition, and every processed food, whether it's animal based or not, is a potential, has potential negative effects, and should also be, claimed as one. It's a toxin at at every dosage, just like alcohol is. There's nothing good about processed sugar, never. So it doesn't mean that we can't have a treat once in a while, but when we have one, we should know about the potential negative effects of it. And my work just focus on promoting natural foods based on the individual cravings, and excluding all the processed ones, basically.
Okay. What about seed oils specifically? Which oils should people stay away from, and why?
Well, those seed oils have the problem that they are super omega-6 dominant and just not a natural food component, because in nature you wouldn't consume those seeds in those big amounts. And they also contain a lot of anti-nutrients, which you which you definitely don't want to overconsume. And those seed oils, for example, to name an example, sunflower oil, those extracts are super high in omega-6 fatty acids and going to lead to an omega-6 dominance, which, as we probably all know, will promote pro-inflammatory processes in the human body. So that would be one example why that is not really a great idea. Also, we have negative effects on the microbiome, which we already discussed. Omega-6 oils have an impact on that. And of course, with the omega-6 dominance, you have various side effects on the cognitive and on the physiological level. So that one will spread.
Okay, so stay away from the seed oils. So, you've got that probably that cognitive decline, and going to mess with like anxiety and mental health. And I know you post about lifestyle habits and food, because you're not just talking about specifically food. You're talking about everything that you can do, from what you do when you wake up in the morning, to getting some sunlight. What are some things that people can do even for their lifestyle? Obviously they know that they need to cut out the sugars and the seed oils and things like that, but what can they do to help with their mental health and clarity every day?
Well, there are, of course, a lot of aspects, and it's a little bit also about personal preference, what kind of, healthy habits you want to include into your daily life. But things like a morning run, which is something I really enjoy, with the sunrise. I talked about the benefits of morning sunlight a lot on my Instagram page as well. Then, of course, the benefits of going to the gym, workout, building up muscle tissue, which is one of the major aspects to live a healthy lifestyle, even with progressing age. Lean body tissue is a huge aspect for that, highly underrated. So, especially the elderly should really focus on some gym work. And also every nutritional aspect that we talk about is linked to certain behaviors in your everyday life. Like I did the example with the sofa and the over-consuming of crisps or chips or whatever. So there are a lot of potential triggers for interventions, but on an individual level, because those lifestyles look different, and we have to talk about those individual things. But also things like, sounds weird, but having a reading routine, for example, is something that really promotes not only your cognitive health, but also just makes you a better person. Because for some reason, people that learn a lot and study a lot, they don't overconsume foods for some reason, because it's just a part of a healthy lifestyle,
Yeah.
And it's the things that you do are going to affect every other things, or to the better or to the worse. There's never a neutral decision. And if you watch the news with some new indoctrination or whatever, makes a huge difference to reading a critical source in a textbook and just making up your own mind.
So, yeah. Makes sense. All right. I know you're tight on time, so I got a couple more questions for you. What about supplementation? What is your thought process on supplements that people should take, or maybe some things that people are over consuming?
Generally, I think that the supplementation in general increases its importance in the modern area or in the modern life because we have a huge decrease of general food quality. So the foods that we consume now, if it's the animal-based or the plant-based foods, they don't contain as many micronutrients and vitamins and minerals as it used to be. So that's why supplementation really has to get more focus nowadays than it used to be. Usually I'm a big supporter of trying to cover all your nutrient needs with real foods, but this is going to be harder when with every year that passes. So we have to especially focus on components like vitamin D, which I talk a lot on my page as well. It's hard to cover that with natural food sources, especially when you don't have the opportunity to get out into the sun, like where you're living and where I live is possible right now.
Yeah.
So vitamin D is a huge aspect for many reasons. Even though I'm eating a salmon steak every day, it's hard for me to cover all my vitamin D. We have things like cobalamin or B12, which has a huge aspect on a lot of metabolic levels, and also is especially for people that tend to eat plant-based, always an issue and always something that you have to focus on. So I don't think that there's a supplement that is better than the other. It just depends on your food choices and what you can cover from it and whatnot. Except maybe vitamin D, which we should all supplement, especially during winter times, and maybe omega-3 supplements like DHA and EPA, which is hard to cover by natural foods if you don't have the opportunity to eat fish or fatty sea fish every day, which of course is also a financial question and for a lot of clients.
Yeah. What about magnesium? You speak a lot about magnesium. Why do we need to make sure that we get enough magnesium?
Well, magnesium has a huge impact on the metabolism on many levels, which also contributes to the massive amounts of potential side effects of a magnesium deficiency, which I posted about a couple of days ago. The range is huge. Magnesium directly activates the parasympathetic system, which helps with getting enough sleep in. It is essential for activating the vitamin D hormone. So not only taking enough vitamin D, but also enough magnesium is essential to have to activate the vitamin D that you're consuming. And there are just a lot of things. It is essential for so many enzymatic reactions that it basically affects every cell that we have. So the range is huge.
So where do you, if people, what are some main foods that people should be consuming to get magnesium? And if they don't get that, is there a general recommendation on how much magnesium they should be taking in a day if it's supplement form?
Well, that really depends a bit on the individual itself. My personal recommendation is fatty sea fish, also for magnesium. I pointed that out a lot in my Instagram page, basically because of the combination of vitamin D and magnesium that you have in fatty sea fish. So that is a very good recommendation there. With the amounts that I recommend, it's very hard to tell. I'm usually not the guy that does general recommendation on the intake of any kind of supplement or form of nutrient, also from natural food sources, because as I already claimed, I'm a supporter of those natural body signals. And if the body craves for more magnesium, it's going to let you know usually. So, and that's when I come to action and not focusing too much on numbers, which have a huge potential to be biased in some way. So,
Sure.
yeah.
How do you know if it's craving magnesium, or some other nutrient, right?
Well, usually that could be something that people unnaturally crave for sugary foods.
Mm.
That's, for example, one thing that I talked about a lot, how that happens, because people usually don't crave for sugary foods on a natural level, because, as mentioned, carbohydrates are a non-essential nutrient. So the craving has to come from mainly from something else, and magnesium is one component that could be missing to cure that issue. So that would be one example. But
Okay.
those topics get really detailed, and if we go that path, I think we open up more questions than answers. So
that's fair. All right, that's fair. Okay, last question. Where do you feel the future of your field, nutritional science, is headed, and what are you excited about?
That's hard to tell, because I think we're now at some sort of a split point in which direction we really want to go, because this plant-based community is very, very strong, and with this entire forced by Fridays for Future, this climate change thing, however you stand towards those things, but it has a huge impact on how we see nutritional interventions and what is ideal and what's not. And I have a question if that is the right path, or if we should really focus more on natural food sources and include everything that we have in our power and all the aspects that we can really try. If people focus on one direction exclusively, there usually is some aspect that they don't want you to ask. I'd say it that way. And that gives me a little bit of a weird feeling how they're going to have impact on for example, on taxes with meat consumption and all those kind of things. So I hope that the opportunity will be there, that we have that we can increase general food quality, the agriculture, that we don't demonize any sort of foods, but generally force the quality of those foods, and try to promote real education on those foods, critical information, not like biased from one side, from one wing only, but educate the people on how vital those topics are, and spread this information. That would be that's basically why I started this entire thing also. So
Okay.
I want a fair debate on those things, and this is what I try to stand for.
All right, Rubio, where can people find you?
Well, I have an Instagram page called Rubio Fuerte, where I post regularly and try to how do you say, simplify complex topics so that we can spread the information to a bigger audience. Because usually when people have these nutritional debates, there are so many weird sounding terms for many people, that it's just not making sense to have this debate with a bigger audience. And I try to simplify those, and that's mainly happening on my Instagram page, Rubio Fuerte.
Okay. Rubio, Rubio Fuerte, Fuerte. Fancy name. He's like a movie star. All right, Rubio, thanks for coming on. I'm Joey Thurman. This was another episode of the Fatter Future podcast. Remember, don't be a fatty, Faddy. Be a part of the future.